Hello, my people. So we are on a new part of the book, Keep Your Love On by Danny Silk. We are on the part of boundaries, and chapter 8 is levels of intimacy. So I'm going to start off by reading a little bit in the beginning of this chapter, and then I'm going to give you a personal recount of how this applies in my life. It talks about how a couple named Bob and Linda were always stressful, always financially strained, and they were always in a relational survival mode. So in here it talks about Bob and his contribution onto those three parts. It says, Bob has a great talent for fixing cars and has always helped his friends out with their cars for free, even though he couldn't really afford it. Right before his little girl's 7th birthday, he got a call from a friend saying that his car he fixed for free the previous weekend had broken down again. The friend begged Bob to come right away because he had to get somewhere as soon as possible. Bob kissed his little girl on the head and went to work on the car. After returning home late that night, he and Linda had another argument over how his friends and their car problems seemed to be more important than their family. But Bob couldn't figure out why he was using his talent to help people, how that could be a problem. He saw it as his ministry. Now for Linda, it talks about her contribution. And it says she had two friends whose daughters were getting married. Neither could afford to buy clothes for the bridal parties. So Linda, who is a really good seamstress, she offered to sew all of the dresses for free. She sewed nonstop for 2 months. She missed a piano recital and a Little League championship game because she was running out of time to finish the project. Her commitments to help her friends brought a high level of stress into her life, but she powered through it because that's what she was supposed to do. She was serving. So because of that, their kids were constantly seeing stressed out parents. They were unavailable parents. They were financially strapped. And essentially Bob and Linda weren't practicing ministry. They were practicing a life without healthy boundaries. They were on the road to destroy their relationships with each other, with their children, and eventually those they were trying to serve, because they didn't know how to establish and protect appropriate levels of intimacy in their lives. So as I read that, it was like a smack to my face. And I read it to Tyler last night. He came in while I was reading the book and asked me what I was reading, and I read that part to him, and we were both taken back to our marriage in the beginning. And I'll explain why. Tyler has always had a very big servant's heart. He has always dropped whatever he's doing to help the next person in need, whether they're calling, stopping in. If they need something, he's there. It didn't matter what he was doing. And there were a lot of times where we were going to go to an event together, or we were going to have one of the girls' birthday parties, and someone would call needing something, or someone would pull in, and he would just stop whatever he's doing and he'd take care of it. And a lot of times I'd have to remind him, your daughter's birthday party is at such and such time, and he would be like, okay, I'll do my best to be there on time. So that put a lot of stress between him and I, and that put a lot of stress on his plate because he didn't know how to set a healthy boundary of when he needs to protect his time, because his time is valuable. He only saw it as he was put here to help people, and so that's what he was going to do. Now on here it talks about, Linda, how she was serving the people by sewing the dresses for free, and it took up all of her time, and she missed things because of it. Now, on that sense, that was me and my photography. And for many years, I would not necessarily stop what I was doing to commit to photography, but I was overloading my plate. So I was working throughout the week, and on the weekends is when I would book my photography. And I was doing it so that from sunrise to sunset on Saturdays and Sundays, I had people booked for photo sessions, just one right after the other. And I was extremely stressed out. I wasn't communicating with Tyler. We weren't together as a family. I wasn't there for my kids. And so I had to learn how to put boundaries. And it started small. It started with, okay, I'm not going to work and do photography on Sundays anymore because that is the rest day, that is the Lord's day. So I'm going to stop that. And let me tell you, that first baby step was amazing. But the next step I had to learn was my Saturdays. Because I wasn't doing Sundays anymore, it felt like my Saturdays were booked one right after the other after the other. And so then I had to take another baby step and say, okay, I'm going to pick out one Saturday a month and not schedule anything on that Saturday. That will be a family day. And so that's what I did. And once I got that established, that boundary established, it was amazing. So my other 3 Saturdays were essentially booked even tighter. And then there was people wanting to get on the weekdays because I wasn't doing that Saturday. So little by little, I had to start setting boundaries because not only was I booking photography sessions, but then I had to find the time to edit, which would be in the evenings. So Tyler comes home from work, my nose is stuck in the computer, I'm doing my editing just so that I can get the pictures back to the clients on time, because they'll start to grumble if I tell them one date and I go past that. And so little by little, I started having to incorporate healthy boundaries for my clients and for my family and for myself. And, we're still working on it. Tyler's still working on his boundaries in the shop. I'm still working on my boundaries in the photography. And it's something we're always going to be working on together. But the difference is we have started to figure out what our healthy boundaries are, and we've started implementing them. And now it's becoming easier to see what is a priority and what isn't, and how to go about that. So that was my little backstory. I'll continue on this book. It talks about the levels of intimacy. So not everyone should have the same access to you. I know if you think like, these are all my friends, I should be able to share every bit of information about myself to them, but that's simply not the case. So as Christians, we have core values to honor, to love the poor, to serve others, to lay down our lives, and be the hands and feet of Jesus. So it's really easy to think that it's spiritual to offer all people unlimited access to our lives. But anyone who tries to do this eventually discovers that it's not sustainable, it's not healthy, and it's not actually spiritual. So here's a little example of what it means when you don't set boundaries around levels of access and intimacy. So in here, the writer gives a little story. He's saying, say you have been married for a while and you have a few kids and a dog. Your husband comes to you and says, honey, Buster is cold sleeping outside. Do you think he could stay in here with us for the night? And because you hesitate because you don't want, a 200-pound bull mastiff in your room to turn into an every night thing. You hesitate, but you don't want to upset your husband, so you agree. Well, then the next night he asks, honey, Joey is having nightmares again. Can he just sleep in here with us? It will just be for one night. Okay, you're starting to see a pattern. A few weeks later, you have Buster, little Joey, not so little Susie, and the pet gerbil all sleeping in your room. Not too long after that, your husband asks if his brother can borrow a few $100s to pay off a debt. Susie goes on an outreach and meets Debbie, who was homeless until she moved into your house. And your husband's brother's crack-addicted friend is now knocking on your door asking for more money to pay off the debt he owes. Okay, so you can kind of start to see the pattern. They didn't have healthy boundaries set, and so little by little, stuff starts creeping in, and that's not a good Christian life. That is a panic attack. It goes in here to say, let's look at Jesus and how he lived his life. So he prioritized certain relationships over others. He didn't offer the same level of access and intimacy to everyone around him. So his closest relationships were his 12 disciples. They were the people he partnered with, he traveled with, he taught, he trained, he trusted. Within that group, he was especially closest to Peter, James, and John. Now, they were the ones that they got to share incredible encounters and conversations with that nobody else did. And then we know from the Bible that of those 3, John was the one that Jesus loved. So the writer gives us a diagram, and I'll show it to you on here. It's this circle here, and you see that person in the middle. That is your core right there. So the innermost circle, your core, is known as the God spot. So it's essentially saying God is the only person that belongs at the core of your heart and your spirit. Then the next level of intimacy is for your most intimate human relationship. Now, only one person is going to fit in that spot. And if you're married, that should be your spouse. If you're not married, that could be a friend or parent, a sibling, or even a business partner. The further you go out in the circles of intimacy and the more people can fit in them, the next circle contains people like your kids, your grandkids, followed by your closest friends. Heading out further, you have good friends, then coworkers and acquaintances. And if you keep on going, you're going to find people in the same geographic location, and then finally, like the rest of the human race. So, yes, you are called to love all people, but that doesn't mean that all people have access to your core. You may be called to pray for somebody from Hollywood, but just because you pray for them doesn't mean that you're allowing them into your core circle. It's your job to manage your life so that you can offer the people in your innermost circles appropriate access to your core. Excuse me. Now, he says, sadly, sometimes people in your innermost circles, they hurt or they scare you very seriously, and they're unwilling to clean up the mess they made. If that happens, it's okay to move them out of a place of access they once were and put them in an outer intimacy circle, and then you can keep loving them. It just may be a very long time before you invite them back to dinner, kind of thing. Okay, so here are some examples of boundaries around levels of intimacy. So the level of intimacy people have in your life determines how much of yourself you're willing to offer them when they pull in the relationship. So what that would look like is if you're chatting with someone from church for the first time and they tell you that their engine in their car blew up, you're probably going to give them sympathies and offer to pray for provision. If it's someone you've interacted with a few times and you know them a little, you'd probably say something like, "Oh, I'm sorry, here is the number to my mechanic," okay? If it's one of your good friends and they tell you about their engine, you might throw them your keys and say, "Here, borrow my car until your car is fixed. Take your time." And then if it's your daughter or one of your sons and they go up to you and say, "My engine just blew up," you'd probably pull out your checkbook and help cover the repairs. Finally, if it's your spouse or that one person in your innermost circle, there's no doubt in your mind that you would be talking with them to essentially pick out the color of the next car because they're your most intimate human relationship. You're willing to put all of your time, all of your energy and resources into helping him or her with the problem. So you can kind of see the different levels there, just like the circles, if they're farther out in the circle, it depends, how you're going to interact with them versus if they're in your innermost circle, you're going to be that much more intimate with them. So the writer in here puts, I have my phone number in the phone book, and a lot of people tell me to change it, but I am letting people know that I'm always there for them. And when I was reading this, he goes to say, if you call me and your last name isn't Silk or Serple, you will most likely go to voicemail. I will decide upon hearing your voice whether to respond to you right now or wait until later. You will never be responsible to manage my time at home. That's my job. I have a boundary that I am under no obligation to answer or even call you back. I didn't set this boundary either to offend or please you. I did it to manage my priorities at my house. How awesome is that? Okay, so this is one thing I didn't even realize I was doing. But whenever my phone rang, if I didn't know the phone number and if I was busy doing something else, I'd let it go to voicemail. Okay, and if they didn't leave a voicemail, it must have not been that important. But here's what I'm getting at is I'm not going to stop whatever I am doing to answer this call, especially if I don't know who you are. And then if you leave a voicemail or you send me a message and I listen to the voicemail and it sounds like I need to call you right away, I'll do that. But if it's, hey, I'm just checking up, okay, great. I'm going to finish what I'm doing over here and then I'll get to you. And that's setting a healthy boundary. I'm not dropping everything at a dime to take care of this. I need to take care of myself first and my priority. So as boundaries, as their values increase in my life, other things have become less and less capable of competing with that value, just like the phone call. I know I have to set a boundary for answering phone calls or texting back right away. And if I'm busy with something, especially if it's important or helping my kids, I'm going to do what I'm doing with them before I answer back. So when I am learning to do my boundaries, especially with phones, because smartphones, you have all the access in the world at the tips of your fingers to just go and do it and find the answer right then and there. So smartphones are almost too good. So what I'm getting with when I'm saying all this is because I've learned to set my boundaries, I don't struggle with guilt anymore. Like when I'm ignoring a phone call and I'm spending time with Tyler, when he gets home from work at night, it used to be if my phone would ring or jingle from a text or an email would come through and it would alert me and he was talking, I'd, look at it and see who it was. And I'd be like, okay, in my head, I'm thinking he's talking. Do I answer this call? Do I text this back or do I wait? It doesn't work like that anymore because I've learned how to set healthy boundaries. If he comes in from work and he's talking and my phone starts going off, I'll reach over and shut it off without even looking at it. And he'll look at me like, aren't you going to get that? But no, because my healthy boundaries that I've set, it doesn't bother me to do that anymore because that person will leave a message or I can get back to it later. I'm focused on Tyler at that moment. He is currently my healthy boundary. He's my intimate person. So I'm investing all of my time into listening to him talk about his day. That thing over there, that phone, I don't need that right now. And even the kids know that if I'm talking and they come up and they want me, they know that if they're going, Mom, 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 I'm not going to answer them. And they have learned that. It's taken a little while, as with kids. You've got to train them up to be respectful and responsible and all the different things that we teach our children. But they know, like if I'm speaking with an adult or I'm speaking with Tyler, or even if I'm on the phone and they need something, they'll come up and they'll place their hand on my arm and they'll hold it there. And that's how I know that they need my attention. When we get to a break, when I'm speaking with somebody, I'll answer them. But and it's been a learning curve because for a long time they just come up and be like, Mom, 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 Mom. And you know how your kids are, how they do that. So we've really taught them, let's be respectful. I'm in an adult conversation right now. If you really need me that bad, place your hand on my arm and hold it there. And as soon as I get a break, I will answer you. And let me just tell you, that has been a life changer because I don't have to hear that annoying Mom, Mom, Mom anymore. Now with Tate, he's still too little. He doesn't understand. But the girls, they get it now. And it's been so fascinating to encounter that. So anyways, got off track just a little bit. So let's get back on the book. So the end of the book, it talks about your boundaries. There will be things that try to compete with our value for God, for our core, for our innermost circle, even for our outer circles. There will be things that try to compete. They will tempt us to violate our boundaries. They will try to give away to others what only God deserves. The enemy wants to use these tests to distract us and to ruin our lives. So what happens if you give in to those tests? Well, you start to form idolatry, and that is making someone an idol other than God. That is like, let's say your spouse was your most intimate person, and all of a sudden, you got a best friend, and you're pulling that best friend into that role, and you're pushing your husband out, essentially. And then it starts to creep in. So God is supposed to be your innermost, in your innermost heart and your soul, and you start to pull your friend in and you're like, okay, friend, I'm all about you right now. God is on the back burner. I'll pray when I think about it. I'll thank him when things are good. When things are bad, I'll start praying really hard. but me and you, we're kind of close right now. That's essentially idolatry. And it could not, it doesn't always have to be a person. It can be things like money. I'm all about making that money. And so money starts to fill your heart and you start to get greedy. You start to feel jealous, or you start to get anger because you've pushed God out and you've started bringing other things in to fill your void. So your boundaries will start to disappear, okay? You'll forget what a healthy boundary is, and they'll start to disappear. And pretty soon, the kids are controlling your life. Your marriage is falling apart. Before you know it, you're trying to escape by having an affair or taking up some ridiculous hobby or addiction. You end up becoming scared and powerless, and you start to manipulate people just so that you can start to play a survival role. Now, that's what happens if you sink into the enemy's lies and you allow him to distract you from your healthy boundaries. Now, what happens if you go opposite? What happens if you allow God to use those tests to make you powerful? Well, it becomes easier to live within the boundaries that, as you keep God the priority in your lives, it protects your priorities that he has defined for our relationships. So for me, I don't want to be distracted by the test, because there will be things to compete with your values for God, and that will try to violate your boundaries. A really good example of this is just a few weeks ago, we had a wedding to attend, and I was photographing this wedding. And so I said, okay, this is the day that the wedding is on. This is the time that I need to leave the house to be able to be there. And I was talking to Tyler, I said, can you bring the kids at such and such time so you're there for the ceremony? A few weeks before, absolutely sounds good. The week before, sounds good. A few days before, there's starting to be problems. And we didn't recognize the boundaries at first until it was too late. But the enemy was using tests to distract Tyler. He knew that I was going to go. Like, I had to go. For one, I was a photographer. For two, they were like my family. I wasn't going to miss it. And he knew that. But he knew how to get to Tyler. And if you remember in the beginning of this, I talked about Tyler being faithful and being a faithful servant on helping others. So the enemy started using these tests to distract Tyler. And I kid you not, the day of the wedding, he was supposed to pour concrete for one of our porch pads out there. Well, the gentleman who was going to help with it, his concrete at his other job wasn't drying. So all of a sudden his time was being delayed. So that pushed our time back. Then someone pulls into the shop and says, I need this welded. Just like that. We weren't expecting anybody to come. Normally Tyler has a little bit of a heads up if someone needs welding done. As he gets this person out, another person is literally driving down the road and pulls into the shop with this giant thing saying, this gate broke. I need it welded. In the meantime, Tyler is supposed to drive north of town to pick some things up with a buddy, and the buddy is waiting on Tyler. Tyler finally gets done with what he's doing. They leave. They're not even 2 miles down the road, and someone else pulls in the driveway, and they're like, hey, we're looking for Tyler. It was just me there at the time, and I was like, he isn't here. I'm sorry. You're going to have to come back later or something because he's not here. So within a matter of what seemed like 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours, there were 6 people that were driving in, vying for Tyler's attention to do something in the shop for him. So when Tyler gets back, I'm finally like, Tyler, I've got to leave. Don't forget, the ceremony's at this time. Please bring the kids and be there at this time. And he flat out looked at me. He says, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can make it. So we made other arrangements to have the kids brought so the kids could enjoy the wedding, and I was there too. And I got home, and Tyler was still waiting for the concrete to dry. I kid you not. They poured the concrete at like 2:30. It was 11 o'clock that night before the concrete was dry. That is the time frame that they sat and waited, and while he was doing other things as well. But the enemy knew. The enemy was like, I'm going to put all these people in his path to stop him from going to this. and he knew how to get to Tyler. And like I said, at that time, we weren't really aware that our boundaries were being tested. We just saw it as people needed help. Okay, I understand. You can stay back and help. I'll go ahead and forward. We're not mad. We're on the same page. We're both in agreement. So we went on our ways. But now going through these chapters, we're going, duh. You know, the enemy totally got us because our boundaries, apparently they weren't set in stone, and it crept up on us. Now, luckily, you know, we were able to see it and we were able to recognize it and to talk about it and figure out what was really, truly going on. But imagine if we hadn't have figured that out and the enemy would continue to send tests to distract us and to distract Tyler, and how easy it is to get off course, because it could have been like that he'd flipped to his old ways and been like, well, I can't do this today because I've got to work in the shop. And then the next night, well, I can't do that because I've got to work in the shop. And it's like a repeating, occurring thing. So I'm so very thankful for this book. If you haven't read it, or you're just now following along, it's Keep Your Love On by Danny Silk. We only have 2 more chapters left in this book, and it kind of makes me sad because I love it. But Danny does make, I think he makes a few other books that I would really like to get and to keep doing these videos online. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to message me. I hope you guys had a fantastic time listening. I love you all, and we'll talk to you later.